So first of all, I just want to say welcome to all of you. For those of you who don't know, my name is Ashley Barbour. I'm the founder of an online community called Cleft Love. I'm the co-host of the Love Me Try podcast, and I'm so excited to be here today to talk about a topic that I know that we've all had to consider at one point or another: how, when, and or why to disclose information about our cleft in the professional setting. And we're so grateful to our panelists, Crissy Maier, Dennis Martin, and Sara Williamson for sharing their experiences in this area and providing their advice to all of us today. So let's get started. First of all, I would love to know a little bit about each of you, your cleft backgrounds, and sort of your career paths up until this point. And I'd love to start with Sara, and then we'll just go down the line.
Hi guys, I'm Sara. I was born with a unilateral cleft on my right side. I'm a flight attendant. I have been for about a year and a half now. So it's been an interesting journey because I have had a surgery within that period. So there's been a lot of navigating, but yeah, it's all going well.
Hi, I'm Crissy, and I was born with a unilateral left cleft lip and palate. I was a NYPD police officer and sergeant. When I retired, I worked for a small publishing company for about 2 years, and now I'm actually a flight attendant, like brand new.
Thank you. My name is Dennis Martin. I was born with bilateral cleft lip and palate, and what they used to call pie face or facial hypoplasia. So I've had over 30 surgeries. My career is in transportation. At one point I was the chief executive officer of New Jersey Transit. So if anyone took the train today, or the bus, I was the head of that. I was also the vice president of the Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority for the MTA. So if you came over the Verrazano or the Ucari Tunnel or the Queens Midtown, that would have been me too. So welcome, and I'm looking forward to sharing my story with you.
Thank you so much. So my first question, I'm going to direct at Sara, actually. Do you think that your experience with cleft, growing up with cleft, impacted the career that you ended up choosing? Because I feel like being a flight attendant is very face forward, and you're dealing with the public every day, and so I'm wondering if, cleft at all impacted your decision to go into that.
Yeah, definitely. So it is very forward facing, like you said, and I feel like all of us having a cleft, we all know that moment when you're talking to someone, their eyes kind of like look down, you're like, you're looking at my lip, aren't you? And so I had become a flight attendant right towards the end of COVID, so masks were still a thing, non-negotiable, everyone was wearing masks. And I remember at the interview, there was a moment where we had to take the mask down. I guess they wanted to see if we had any crazy piercings or face tattoos that we were hiding under there. But I remember I'm just like, oh God, I knew they weren't gonna say anything, but that feeling, they're gonna look and they're gonna be like, do that double take. So it was definitely kind of intimidating at first, and especially seeing hundreds of people a day. I was very intimidated because I knew I was going to be telling my story over and over and over because people were going to be asking. But that's something that I was like, that's okay. I will tell my story over and over and over, and it didn't inhibit me. And I've been sharing my story. Get the attention. Everyone's like, oh my God, you're beautiful. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I do appreciate the compliments, but it's just so funny. Every day, people are so willing to hear you. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, thank you so much. Crissy, have you had to navigate disclosing your cleft to your employer? And if so, how did you do that?
So I actually have a funny story for this. I was a rookie cop in the 9th precinct. I'm worried about being this small, I'm smaller back then, petite female in a man's world that's can at times be very physical. And I'm standing in front of our desk, and this woman, police officer, says to me, "Do you have a cleft lip?" And I was like, "Yes." Well, she had a cleft lip and palate. We had the same surgeon, and I ran into Nancy a couple months ago in the airport. She is just this ball of energy who's not ashamed to be tell you who she is, what she is, and sort of flaunt it. And it really, it gave me more confidence to just, you know, be like, oh yeah, oh, a scar, yeah, I have a cleft lip and palate, and just not be afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then Dennis, have you ever experienced any discrimination or any unfair treatment as a result of your cleft? I feel like in our conversation you said that, especially starting in the workforce a few decades ago, that your experience back then was different than it is now.
Yeah, I started in the early 80s, and awareness of cleft and anyone with disabilities, there was much more, hazing that went in. So, there were immature people in the workplace that, would make fun of the way I either looked or talked. However, I had good parents, and they taught me to use that as motivation. So my mother used to always say, don't let people pull you down, gravitate towards people that lift you up. And that's good advice, and there are people throughout my career who, recognizing, you have a cleft and it is a form of disability, they gave me an extra chance to advance. So
Yeah.
I got, the negative was there, but the positive outweighed it.
Yeah. And then have any of you, I feel like, Sarah, you said that you had a surgery recently while you were just starting your new job, and this is a question for any of you as well. Like, if you had a surgery coming up, how did you talk about that with your employer? How was that received? Yeah.
Yeah, so while I was in training, I knew I had the surgery coming up. You know, we all know when we have our surgeries, and this was my last one. So I had known right from the beginning, I was like, this is it. I was like, if they're not gonna give me this time off, I was fully prepared to be like, this is my surgery. So it was very nerve-wracking, because we do this thing where we start flying, we have 6 months of very strict probation. You cannot miss a day of work, nothing. They don't care about anything, within reason. And so I was really nervous, and especially being such a large company, I was like, they can just give all my trips to someone else. And, it was definitely very, it was an uncertain time, but my manager, she was awesome. I reached out to her. They put like a case manager on it, and she was reaching out to me during my recovery. She's like, how are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. They helped me get set up with all these resources that I didn't even know that the state of New York had, because I'm based here in New York. So, there was a lot that was there. And I feel really, really grateful that my company, like, they not only were like, okay, have your surgery, they were checking in with me and everything. So I really, I love Delta for that.
I love Delta. Crissy, do you have a surgery time that you had to disclose to work about an upcoming surgery?
Yeah. When I was in the police department, I was actually assigned at New York City Office of Emergency Management. I think I had 9 surgeries while I was there.
Oh my goodness.
And so obviously I had to tell them I was having surgery. Now the police department's kind of weird because we have unlimited sick, so you literally just call in advance of your shift and just go, and then you have to go see surgeons. But obviously I worked in a small office at the time, so I had to let my bosses know. And because of the arrangement, I had like 6 different bosses to tell. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And I think most of them knew I had a cleft lip and palate, just how it came up, because I was never shy about mentioning it if it came up appropriately. But it was always nerve-wracking because you feel like, I'm having surgery, I don't know how long I'm going to be out. And then after a while, it's just like, oh yeah, I have to have another surgery.
Yes.
And they'll be like, no, I don't know when I'll be back, sorry.
Right.
But yeah, it's nerve-wracking to tell them. And then some of my bosses were really good, and they would check on me. Others, I'd be like, oh, I'll be back next week. They're like, okay, great. They didn't seem fazed by it or really concerned over me. But that's personalities. Right. In terms of the police department, I had to actually go see a surgeon. So they're not really a surgeon, they're a doctor.
Yeah.
And I felt like none of them knew much of anything about what was happening to me, and so they just gave me all the time, whatever my doctor said, they followed those rules because they don't want to deal with me having a problem after surgery,
Yeah.
especially in the police department, unless it happened. So that was sort of weird because I could have probably just told them anything and they would have believed me, within reason. But that's, that here I'm talking to doctors and they don't know anything about what's happening to me when I give them a name of the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, I have a funny story. I had several surgeries. What I generally tried to do was schedule the day surgery on a Friday, take the day off, and show up at work on Monday. But one time I had to be out for a while, so the company had a policy that you had to go to the company doctor after the surgery and get approved to come back to work. So, and I'm not making this up. I go to the doctor, and the doctor's looking inside my mouth, and he says, "You know you have a hole in the roof of your mouth?" I said, "Yeah, it's called a cleft palate." So much for that doctor.
That's about qualified mind.
Oh my gosh, I remember I had surgery a couple years ago and I had to tell my new job about it, and I went to my supervisor and I was like, it's a cleft related surgery, and he proceeded to tell me that he grew up with someone with cleft, and he talked to me for probably like 20 minutes to explain to me about cleft lip and palate. Oh, that's so interesting. It was like a total mansplain. I was like, whoa. Let's see. So, Crissy, do you have any advice for people who might be hesitant to disclose their cleft in a professional setting? Because I know some of us, right, we're just not there, or we're just starting to get there, or it feels really uncomfortable because it feels kind of vulnerable. What would you say to someone who's having a hard time?
Be where you are. If you're comfortable being out there and telling everybody, do that. If you're more nervous about it, you don't have to tell anybody. If somebody asks you about it, you say, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, and say, I don't really like to talk about it. 99.9% of people will just leave it at there because they'll know. And then when you're open to talking about it, you can open that door again. But you don't have to tell anybody anything. I do find there are a lot of people, they know the law, and they know they're not supposed to do and say anything, and so a lot of people will not bring it up unless you bring it up. So if you feel like you're getting that funny look, maybe it's time to just be like, did you notice I have a cleft lip and palate?
Yeah.
And then just be like, I had a couple surgeries, and just kind of leave it at that. You can control that conversation. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
By your body language, the words you use, and the way you sort of project it.
Yeah.
Up until my current job, and I put on LinkedIn that I would be at this conference, people generally wouldn't approach me about it. But once I posted that, a lot of people, they came out of the woodwork and talked to me.
Yeah.
So, and I'll bore you to death. I'll give you the whole history of 30 surgeries if you start asking. So beware.
Be careful what you wish for about. Okay, so Sarah, I know that you've talked about how inclusive Delta is.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think employers can do to make a workplace more inclusive? Or what are some of the ways that you found that Delta has been the most supportive for you?
So I found that Delta's a very inclusive company. They're not paying me to say this.
Sure.
They have what we call business resource groups, and they're a bunch of different kinds. There's environmentalism, there's a feminist women in the workplace group. There's also a group for people with disabilities. And one of my first memories of being introduced to that group was on my very first day of training. I walked in, and my instructor, he was partially deaf. He had hearing aids, and everyone was like, attendant? Like, like there's something wrong with him. And I feel like there's a lot of that sort of taboo idea that like, you can't do everything that everyone else can. So I feel like Delta really, they pride themselves in putting themselves out there, and the verbiage is very important. I know that when I started, I did some extra training, I'm a nerd. So I did a little bit more work than I had to in the training center, and I became what they call like a Delta ally. So I've been someone that other flight attendants have come to be able to talk to if they have issues, they feel discriminated in any way, shape, or form. I was given that training to help alleviate that situation. So I feel like Delta really is trying to just open their arms. They really are such an inclusive company. And like I said, they were so helpful when I had my surgeries. I really couldn't ask them to do anything else. They're amazing.
I love that so much. So I'm gonna start with Dennis for this one, but feel free to chime in, anyone else. Have you found that when you've had to disclose your cleft at work or anything like that, what sort of positive impact have you found that that's had? Have you found anything that when you are open about it, that people respond in a certain way?
Yeah, as I just mentioned, it's a more positive thing when you're open about it.
Yeah.
If you have, a severe cleft, it's kind of hard to hide, right?
Yeah.
So the people that ask me about it, I'm very open about. One of the things, and it's a little off topic, but it goes to your last question. One of the things that people should be aware of if you're having problems getting your surgeries covered through work. There is a division of the federal government called Division of Vocational Rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
And when I left college, I couldn't get insurance because cleft is a pre-existing or was a pre-existing illness.
Yeah.
I was able to get my surgeries paid for through that program.
Oh, wow.
So I know that's a little off
No,
topic,
that's
but
a great resource.
I wanted to get that out to people that and I was over 21 at the time, so it's not just for children. It's for anybody who is trying to get into the workforce and has an impediment to getting in there. And my congressperson, Chris Smith, was very helpful in getting that. So if anybody needs that or wants to talk to me about that afterwards, I'm free to do that.
Yeah, that's great.
What was the question?
What have you found that there's been a positive impact when you decided to disclose that you have a cleft at work? Have you noticed that there's been like positive, people have received it in a good way, or has it impacted anything in a good way?
I think it has opened the door for people to ask questions.
Yes.
Because they've heard of it, they know something about it, it's not always accurate. And once you start talking about it, they'll start asking questions, and they find out what they didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's I always feel good. I'm like, oh, I educated another person today.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah,
Made a difference.
yes.
Does anyone have any resources or anything that you think would be helpful? So you mentioned Voc Rehab. Does anyone else or if someone's thinking about, I don't know, have you found anything online or anything that's been helpful?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Smile train.
Yeah, the smile train. One thing, I had problems with this and it was rectified, but a lot of times if you have dental work done or something related to the cleft, the dental insurance will say, oh, that's medical, and the medical insurance will say that's dental. I had a very good prosthodontist who wrote a letter of appeal to Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I actually got half paid for medical and half paid for dental, and I didn't have to pay anything. So don't give up. If somebody tells you, oh, that's not covered, I think insurance companies, and not to demean them, but I think their impulse is to say no immediately, especially when it's something they don't really know about.
Yeah.
So fight that and recruit your doctors who fight for you.
That's That's a good point.
I'll add, one of my doctors said the insurance company will deny 90% of claims that come in first time.
Just because,
Yeah, just because they hope you'll go away.
yes,
Don't go away.
yes.
Because he said the next round it's only 60% get rejected.
Yes.
And then it's like 30%. So sometimes you just have to be persistent with
Yeah,
that.
they hope that you're gonna give up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
it's
is-
not cosmetic.
Yeah. Let's see, is there anything that any of you want to share before we open it up to questions from people?
Ooh, I do want to share one
Yes,
thing.
please.
One of my surgeries, I had a surgically assisted rapid palate expander. If anybody knows what that is, you know. So my speech was terrible.
Mm.
And at the time, I literally took phone calls from elected officials, commissioners, and agencies.
Wow,
It was a little high pressure.
yeah,
And my boss, after, it was about a 4-month period I was working, my boss, after about 2 or 3 months, came to me, he's like, has anybody ever given you a hard time?
yeah,
And nobody had, but at that moment, I felt like he would have like gone into an office of somebody like 10 levels above him and just ripped them apart. And I just never felt so backed by somebody,
that's amazing.
yeah,
Yeah,
be that boss and her boss.
right. Good point. My last very important question before we end this is both of you, do you get travel companions and how do I apply that? So, thank you so much to all of you for being here. I know that it's time to wrap it up. Yes, time to wrap it up. I'm getting the signal. And so, what was my last thing? Where can people find you if they want to continue the conversation? If you have a place that you want to go.
You can find me on Instagram. It's my first name, period, and my last name. Very simple. I'm always on there.
Instagram probably is easiest.
Yep.
Traveling Giraffe with 1 G.
I'm on LinkedIn, Dennis J. Martin, AICP. I'm a certified planner.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your vulnerability and for sharing your expertise. And thank you all for being here.